Now, a little important detail is we want to wire up the merge node to all of these nodes that we're creating. So at the end, we have an attribute create node that we want to wire up to the merges and the switches. So in order to be able to set these inputs, we're going to have to create a counter. Otherwise, we'll only set the first input, but there's going to be 5 buildings or 10 buildings or 15 buildings. So we want this counter to go up from 0 to 1 to 2 to 3 and every time set that input again. So we get every building connected into it. So let's create a counter and initialize it to 0. And then every time we go over the for loops down here, let's increase that number so that every time we're going to set an input, it's going to get the next input, wiring all the buildings into it. So we've got 2 code blocks here with the houses and with the commercial buildings. And underneath set inputs that expand some code. So we're going to set the merge. So merge.set input. And into it we will wire the attributes node. And of course we want to include the counter. Let's type it like this first. Basically the first item you pass in is which input to set. So the merge begins with input 0, input 1, input 2, input 3, etc. So the counter has been initialized to 0. We're passing in input 0. And then we're telling it to wire in the attributes node. And the attributes node is here, right? Attributes is who.node or create node, attribute create. We want to do the same for the switch houses node. Switch houses dot set input. And we're going to do the same again, counter attributes. Now what's important is we're going to have to say counter is counter plus 1. Because every time this loop runs, it's going to then increase the counter so that this part becomes 1, 2, 3, etc. So we can set the first input, the second input, the third input, etc. Without the counter, the only thing that's going to get wired into the merge or switch nodes is just the first input. And we can make this code a little bit shorter. Plus is 1. So it's going to take its own value and add 1 to it. Let's copy that bit. Let's add it underneath the commercial towers block of code. Now for the merge, we can just wire it all up together, but I want to use the switch node later on to only get the base parts of the buildings because there's no need for me to scatter the top parts of buildings onto the city blocks. We want the base parts and then work upward from there. And this is why these naming conventions are important, so we can identify which parts we need. We're going to type if building ID, which is the number of the building, ends with, and we're going to say 0 because we know that all the base parts end with a 0, colon, and this line here we're going to make sure that it's indented 4 spaces. So only wire it into the switch if the building ID ends with 0. So let's change this to commercial, otherwise they all get wired into the houses switch node. Let's try that out. No, we get an error again. Switch commercial. Let's find that. Right, so I forgot to add a dot before dot create node. I did the same here. And now let's have a look what we got. If we hit L, we're going to lay them all out. So now we have a merge node containing all of them. We have a switch houses node containing just the houses. And we have a commercial switch with only the commercial buildings wired up to them. That's the code block for this part, and now we should be able to continue and create the building clusters.